For a moment, he watched the birds struggle against the Timal, whipping their wings violently against the wind as they battled desperately for their lives but failed. A feather landed on the skin of his hand, but he beat it off with such haste and violence that he felt a quick pain. Then he heard the sucking sound of the chicken's contact with the waters, followed by vain plunks and splashes of sound, and it seemed that the woman listened too, and in listening he felt an indescribable bond with her, as if they both had become lone witnesses to some inestimable secret crime. He stood there until he heard the woman's gasp. Then he looked up at her, then back at the waters hidden from his eyes by the darkness, and then back at her again.
Thank you so much. That was Nigerian writer Chigozie Obioma reading from his stunning second novel, An Orchestra of Minorities. Shortlisted for the Booker Prize, it's been called a historical treasure and destined to become a classic. It's brilliantly original as it combines Igbo folklore from southeastern Nigeria with Greek tragedy in the context of modern Nigeria. Chigozie Obioma, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure. Now, congratulations on this epic story.
Thank you.
And the book is coming out in French this month. You've been in Normandy at Le Havre's literary festival, Le Goût des Autres. Now, it's a significant year for Nigeria. 2020 is the year you mark 60 years of independence from the British. You've called this book a work of cultural preservation. You were born in the southwestern part of Nigeria to a very large family of around, I think it's 12 children.
Yeah.
Now you live part of the time in the United States where you teach English and creative writing.
Right.
Did you always want to be a writer and bring Nigerian culture and in particular pre-colonial culture to the world?
So yes, I became a writer, I would say, from a very young age. So I started listening to stories from my parents, and I thought words and that ability to create these alternate universes was one of the most miraculous things any human being could do. And from that moment, I knew I wanted to be this person who will observe the society and realize, what I see on the page.
And this book has been an immense success. It's been translated into 16 languages so far. Are you surprised by this thirst for Nigerian culture?
Well, it's a surprise always when, anybody reads your work, but especially this story because it is a story about this cosmology which is no longer even respected in Nigeria. So what colonialism did was that it rendered almost everything that was African inferior in some way to the Western culture. So we've forgotten some of these histories. The idea of the chi, this spirit that ensouls every individual. So I wanted to not only tell a story, but also have a kind of a monument, a resource to which people can go back and look at, this rich, vast, cultures that are buried, on the surface.
And just to explain to the people at home, the chi is like the guardian spirit of the main character, and the story is told from his point of view.
Yes, so it's like a guardian spirit. So even in my name, Chigozie, Chinua. So the Igbos, the chi is central to the worldview of the Igbo people. So it's this spirit that is there before you were born and is reincarnating. It goes back to the domain of the ancestors and returns to ensoul a new individual within the same family structure. So I wanted this spirit to tell this story because it's been coming and going for some 700 years. So it has been through several eras. So it can tell the story of this particular character, but also be a chronicler of history because it's witnessed, for instance, the period of slavery. It ensouled somebody during the Biafra War, or even the first contact with Europeans in the 17th century. So it's a chronicler of history as well as a storyteller.
Which is quite a big challenge for someone who was only 32 when he wrote it, to write it with 7 centuries of knowledge. Now, the socioeconomic condition and the politics of the Nigeria in the book are instruments in the rise and fall of the main character, Chinonso, who sells all he has as a chicken farmer to go to Cyprus to get a university education to impress his lover's family, who come from a higher social class. How do you see life for Nigerians in 2020, 60 years on from independence?
So I think there's a projection that Nigeria will become the poorest country, or the country with the poorest population in 2020. This is a very fatal and disturbing trend because Nigeria is one of the richest countries. I mean, we say this is almost stereotypical and cliched now, but it is true that we have a lot of money. So the country, I hope, will listen to so many people who are calling for a restructuring, because right now there's a lot of poverty, even though we have a lot of financial resources.
So what are some of your goals as a writer when addressing social concerns?
Well, I want to call attention, as you mentioned, to the disparity in class and, the way in which the powerful oppress, the minorities. Chinonso, for instance, is a poor poultry farmer, and his attempt for upward mobility to acquire education and to have money to meet the status of this woman he's in love with is what destroys him, because her family, not herself, refuses to accept him, even though she tries to, explain to them. So I call Nigeria a fiefdom of the invulnerable, because the rich and the wealthy and the politically high class just oppress and make sure that those beneath cannot rise. So that's why the novel is called An Orchestra of Minorities, or in French, the prayer of the birds, or the small animals.
Now, the novel begins with Chinonso attempting to persuade a stranger and from jumping over a bridge and ending her life. The book is based on your own experience growing up in Nigeria and then immigrating to Cyprus as a student, which is exactly what this character does. Tell us more about your inspiration.
So the spark of the story was that I encountered this guy in Cyprus. I had been there for 2 years, the north part of Cyprus, not the south. So the country under UN ban. And I discovered that a lot of Nigerians, especially, were being sent there and deceived by these scammers who posed as agents. And so they will tell them, look, this is the UK or, America or some advanced country, or only for them to come and discover that they had been swindled. So this guy came, discovers that he has lost everything and became very depressed. So he got very drunk and he fell down from the top of a 4-story building and died. So in the aftermath of that event, I started to think about his journey, because he'd mentioned that the main purpose, the main motivation for him coming to Cyprus was because he was in love with this woman. So I wanted to recreate that journey, what was the dynamic between them that would have made him, make that leap to try to get rich quick and come back to marry her.
Now, the book also talks a lot about loneliness. The main character is very lonely. The Chi narrator frequently laments that the protagonist suffers from the despair that is the disease of the soul. Later, he observes that loneliness is the violent dog that barks indeterminably through the long night of grief. At one stage, we think that love is the cure,
yes,
don't we? But in the end, it doesn't really seem that is the case, does it?
Yes. I think that love is a cure, and the love between Ndali and Chinonso is real, but society destroys it because the pressure from the family and also of society, her parents think that he's not suitable for her. And so he has to go to Cyprus. But for a long time, I like to say that the reality of love sustained him, but also the mythology of love, the myth that she would be waiting for him, even though he's gone away, like this guy in Cyprus did. And then when he returns, he discovers that things have changed. And so the mythology of she being his Penelope, is what destroys him.
Now, Minority is very different from your award-winning first novel from 2015, The Fisherman, which explored brotherhood in Nigeria. It earned huge acclaim. It was translated, I think, into 27 languages, yes, probably more now, and it had a spot on the Man Booker Prize shortlist. It's also being adapted into a play.
Yes.
Now, some of the commentators of this book said that this book was a metaphor for Nigeria itself, because in The Fisherman, the 4 brothers of great promise are undermined by a prophecy. Was it supposed to be a metaphor?
Yes, it was. It was a metaphor for Nigeria. Again, the metaphor for how we follow. There's a constitution that was kind of edited, let's say, in 1999, but the thrust of Nigeria's political structure is from colonial time. So it's what the British left for us that we're still imbibing, and it doesn't work. So a lot of people, Wole Soyinka, the Nobel laureate, so many people have been calling intellectuals, why don't we restructure these? Why should we continue with what we had? So the Fisherman tells the story of these four brothers who their lives are changed when they meet this prophet guy who says, this is how your life will be, and they continue, and that destroys them. So that's what my view of Nigeria as well.
Okay, well, we're coming to the end of the show, Chigozie. We always end with our guests' cultural pick of the moment, and you've chosen a project that has brought together a vast picture and sound archive collection by British colonial anthropologist Northcote Thomas in Nigeria between 1909 and 1915, at the height of colonialism. And these materials haven't been seen for something like 100 years.
Yeah.
What do these archives and collections mean for different communities today?
So they really showed how, number one, they are a reservoir of history. So I can see how people were living, in the late 19th century and all that. But also the faces and the voices. You hear the voices of these, long dead people. I think it's a rich historical material, but also it also brings to the fore the way in which the colonialists saw the Africans. There was a lot of dehumanizing. So I think this is a major archive. It will be exhibited again in October, between October to November in London, and I'm hoping to bring it to Nigeria.
Okay, Chigozie, it's been a pleasure to have you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Some of these archives feature in the award-winning short film Faces and Voices. I'm going to leave you with that. An Orchestra of Minorities has just been translated into French. Remember our website? We're also on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. There's more news coming up on France 24 after this. You can see.
Focused.
Trauma. Smiling.
Optimistic person.
Curious. Hopeful.
Pensive.
Suspicious. Curious.
Adventurous.
Explorer.
Colonial master.
Looking really like into the future from the past.